It's the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
All the sports news you need every day in under 20 minutes. Follow Locked On today on the Odyssey app or wherever you get your podcasts.
All right, ladies and gentlemen, you are Locked On Falcons. I'm your host, Aaron Freeman. And today we are discussing A.J. McCarron going on IR and what's next for the Falcons at quarterback, as well as reviewing what I saw on film from the Falcons-Dolphins preseason game and how that impacts various roster battles.
You are Locked On Falcons, your daily Atlanta Falcons podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
So guys, you know me, I'm Aaron Freeman, been covering the Falcons for many years, formerly at FalcFans.com, RIP, still going strong, however, on Twitter at FalcFans, and of course the host of this illustrious Locked On Falcons podcast, your daily Atlanta Falcons podcast, right here on the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. And today's episode is a bit of a recap review of the Falcons-Dolphins preseason game. If you missed our rapid reaction, which posted on Sunday morning after the Saturday night action between the Falcons and Dolphins, you can go listen to that and get sort of my initial reactions. Today's episode will be sort of looking more intently at the various roster battles on both sides of the ball in terms of who sort of raised their stock, lowered their stock, in terms of where the various roster battles are going into this final preseason game, at least how I view it upon rewatching the game, getting some hands on that sort of black market all 22. But of course, today's episode, we're going to kick off with the big news that occurred on Sunday with the confirmation that A.J. McCarron, who was injured in that Dolphins game, is now out for the season with a torn ACL. And we'll talk about sort of what the next plan is for the Falcons, if they will have a sense of urgency in addressing that vacant quarterback spot, whether they roll with Felipe Franks for another week, giving him an opportunity to sort of win that job, or what exactly the Falcons are going to do. And we'll get into all of that on today's Locked On Falcons. But before we get there, guys, you guys know that the NFL season is about to begin, and nobody covers it like the Locked On Podcast Network, starting next week on August 30th and running through the next couple of days leading all the way up to September 8th, the eve of the season opener. The Locked On NFL podcast is previewing every team in every division with the help of the Odyssey lineup of NFL experts. Follow the Ultimate Season Preview 2021 feed on the Odyssey app or wherever you get your podcasts. Tune in beginning August 30th. So with that being said, we got confirmation on Sunday, courtesy of D. Orlando Ledbetter of the Atlanta Journal-Constitution, that A.J. McCarron, the Falcons' backup quarterback, will miss this upcoming season with a torn ACL. The MRI revealed that he did suffer that injury in a non-contact play against the Dolphins, where he handed the ball off to Quadri Olison, although he did scramble in the previous play, and obviously it could have been a situation where he tore it on the previous play, but then didn't feel it pop until the ensuing play. But we'll probably never exactly know in that regard unless A.J. McCarron comes out and tells us. And so that leaves an obvious hole for the Falcons at the backup quarterback position. We'll see if and when they wind up filling it. I think it's certain that the Falcons are going to bring in guys to work out and try out for the team this week, but I don't know if that guarantees that those workouts will go well enough where the Falcons going to feel compelled to sign one of those guys. Names that you've heard constantly thrown around over the last week since McCarron and Franks haven't quite lived up to expectations in these first two preseason games, have been guys like Blake Bortles and Josh Rosen, who was recently released by the 49ers. The Falcons could also wait later in the week when we have a cut down on Tuesday to teams that will get their rosters down to 80 guys. So there probably could be quarterbacks released on Tuesday or by Tuesday that the Falcons could also pursue instead of immediately going out and signing someone like a Bortles or a Rosen. And even if they do sign someone today, as Monday, as most of you are listening to this, you know, that player is only probably going to get like 4 or 5 days of practice between now and that Browns game. And thus, what I said on yesterday's Rapid Reaction episode when we first broached this topic, I don't know if there's a high probability that you'll see that player get a ton of work in that Browns game. And given the limited amount of work, you know, anybody that you wind up picking up between now and then, may not have enough time to really pick up the system, get comfortable, and wind up, quote unquote, taking the job from Felipe Franks next weekend. So with that being said, obviously Franks has not necessarily set a high bar for someone to come in and take that job. He's only completed 33% of his 18 passes through 2 games so far this preseason. So, basically all someone had to do is basically put up a similar stat line to what McCarron put up against Miami through the quarter and a half that he played, where he was like 3 for 6, right? And that player can just come in the fourth quarter of that Browns game, presumably, and complete a couple of passes, and that might be good enough in the Falcons' eyes, since I think the Falcons are probably looking for any reason not to keep Felipe Franks as their quarterback too, given his inconsistencies. And, after that point, the Falcons are going to have the better part of 2 weeks for whoever they wind up picking up to get comfortable before the regular season starts. And, that 2-week window, though, does suggest that the Falcons don't have to feel as compelled as normal to come in and rush and bring in a guy to make a move. Final cuts won't go down until Tuesday, the 31st. And if you were to claim somebody then, you would have roughly 9 days between then and the start of the regular season for that player to start to get acclimated. And obviously, if you can throw on another 5 days this week on top of that, that would certainly help them in that regard. But remember, the Falcons do have a high waiver claim priority. They picked 4th in the draft, and that means they have the 4th waiver claim priority, at least through the first 3 weeks of the regular season, which I believe the rules are that it doesn't revert to current records. It's based off of the previous year's records until after week 3. So the Falcons will maintain a high waiver priority for the next 5 or 6 weeks. And for those of you that are unfamiliar with sort of how waivers work, the quick rundown is basically any player with less than 4 years of NFL experience, if he's released, has to pass through waivers, which basically means all other teams, once a team cuts that player, have an opportunity to basically submit a waiver claim within 24 hours of that player being released. And then if they do, based off of their priority on the waiver list, which is again based off of your record, previous years at this point in time, but later in the season will be based off of current records, will determine if that team winds up successfully doing so. So, for example, let's say Kurt Benkert gets waived by the Packers, right? And the Falcons and Chiefs both want him and they submit a claim. Because the Falcons have a worse record than the Chiefs do, the Falcons will be able to claim Kurt Benkert and they will be able to sign him, essentially. And the way that waivers work is that you inherit the player's current contract. So, for rookies or whatever, you inherit their rookie contract. If a player winds up, signing a monster contract, which is not the case for most players that have 4 or less years of NFL experience, but you inherit that contract. So, because the Falcons have such a high priority, there's only 3 teams that could possibly, basically the Falcons should be able to get almost any quarterback that they want that gets waived over the next 2 weeks or the next week or so. Because the 3 teams ahead of them, we know that the Dolphins aren't really looking for a quarterback because they have Tua and Jacoby Brissett. They're good, right? The Jaguars have Trevor Lawrence, and they're not really actively looking for a quarterback simply because they're actively potentially going to be shopping someone like a Gardner Minshew, so they can give away a quarterback. So why would they be in the market for adding a quarterback? So it basically just leaves the Jets, I think, as the only team ahead of the Falcons in waiver priority that we would have to be worried about putting in a claim over us on a backup quarterback, only because their number 2 quarterback, Mike White, injured his ribs this past weekend. So they might be now in the market for a backup behind Zach Wilson at this point in time. But, I don't know how big a priority that's going to be for them because they're all in on Zach Wilson. So, I think the Falcons are in a prime position where they don't have to feel like they have to go out there and rush. They can wait a week and see who gets cut in those final cuts. Someone like a Trevor Siemian, who we talked about on yesterday's episode, who's currently with the Saints, spent half of 2020 on the Titans practice squad when Arthur Smith was there. Obviously, Kurt Benkert's a player that is a fan favorite. And, who knows what his status is going to be in Green Bay, given that the Packers have Aaron Rodgers and Jordan Love. But maybe they envision Kurt Benkert to be sort of inherit the QB2 spot behind Jordan Love next year if and when Aaron Rodgers winds up getting traded. So maybe they wind up keeping 3 quarterbacks on their roster and don't cut Benkert. And then you can look at the loser of the QB2 battle in Tennessee between Logan Whiteside and Matt Barkley as a possible target. Barkley has some experience playing under Dave Ragone briefly in Chicago. Woodside obviously has spent the last couple of years playing under Arthur Smith in Tennessee. Tim Boyle, who played for Matt LaFleur in a similar offense in Green Bay prior to going to Detroit this past offseason, and he looks like he's about to get cut by the Lions. Brian Hoyer is also known to this Falcons coaching staff from his days in Chicago with Ragone, Houston and Chicago with Charles London, as well as Houston with TJ Yates. Spent the early part of 2017 as the 49ers starting quarterback, so he learned a similar offense under Kyle Shanahan before Hoyer wound up getting benched. And, the Patriots don't really need to keep Brian Hoyer. They have Cam Newton, they have Mac Jones. Jarrett Stidham's on the PUP list, and he's expected to come back by the year's end. So, the Patriots don't need Brian Hoyer at this point in time, so maybe the Falcons could go out and get that guy as their quarterback too. So I think the Falcons have options should they decide to wait a week to go after a quarterback. And certainly they can start making some calls this week if they feel impatient and maybe make a trade. But for my money, I think any draft capital that the Falcons wind up giving up via trade, even a future conditional 7th round pick, is kind of a waste, is an act of desperation that is not necessary. I know we're all sitting here concerned about Matt Ryan's ability to hold up behind this offensive line, but Matt Ryan's missed 3 games in 13 seasons. So we're literally talking about like a 1% chance that, Matt Ryan's missed 1% of his games. So seemingly there's a 99% chance based off of that logic that he's going to probably be healthy for a 14th year. And so to me, giving up a conditional 7th round pick in 2022, based off of a 1% probability of Matt Ryan getting hurt doesn't make a ton of sense, especially when you factor in it's not even like you're trying to salvage a playoff season for the Falcons. Longtime listeners know, I'm not one that advocates tanking, but, I don't think it would be a bad thing in this hypothetical, unlikely situation if Matt Ryan were to get hurt that the Falcons, lose a bunch of games and wind up securing another top 5 pick. I don't see what the downside of that would be. So I don't feel like you need to feel like, well, we have to plug this backup quarterback situation. I don't feel the sense of urgency that maybe others do in terms of trying to find a backup for Matt Ryan, like you might have had certainly towards the end of the Dan Quinn era where your aspirations were certainly playoff team. Obviously no one's going to sit here and say give up on the season, but I don't think Arthur Smith and Terry Fontenot feel, or at least should feel, that pressure, at least in year one, that, we need to make the playoffs. We need to make sure that this quarterback 2 situation is secure in the 1% probability that Matt Ryan gets hurt. So that being said, I will add that longtime listeners know I have not necessarily been praising of recent instances where the Falcons have given up conditional late round picks when I felt like they didn't necessarily have to. All you have to do is see episodes where we talked about their trades for Lee Smith this past offseason and Charles Harris the previous offseason. So I'm just saying you've been warned. I probably won't go as hard against Terry Fontenot and them if they wind up trading for a backup quarterback as I did in those 2 previous aforementioned instances. But I'm just saying you've been warned that I'm probably not going to be heaping praise on Terry Fontenot for making such a dynamite trade when he winds up giving up assets for, to me, what is, I won't say a luxury position because you want to have a capable backup quarterback, but is not something that should be a priority for the Falcons, at least for the next 6 months, in my opinion. So you've been warned. That's all I'm sitting here saying. So with that being said, we're going to continue today's episode breaking down my takeaways from rewatching the Falcons offensive preseason game and sort of discuss, how I think this various roster battles and projections might go at the various positions, starting things off with the offense, and we'll talk about the depth battles as well as turning our attention to the ongoing competition for that starting left guard spot. But before we get there, guys, I do want to plug one of the national shows here on the Locked On Podcast Network. That is the Peacock and Williamson podcast. It is preseason. And if you want to get the skinny on what's going on with all these other teams, of course, you can subscribe to the Peacock and Williamson podcast, where NFL analyst Brian Peacock and former NFL scout Matt Williamson are giving you their takes on all the moves, all the games, all the teams around the NFL. Subscribe to Peacock and Williamson on the Odyssey app or wherever you get your podcasts. So it's that time of year again, and all eyes are turning to football as teams are back on the gridiron to start the football season. As always, BetOnline is your number one spot for all the pro and college football action this season. Get all the updated odds, props, and contests, including the $500,000 NFL Mega Contest and the $200,000 NFL Survivor Contest, open now at BetOnline. Head to the website or use your mobile device to sign up today at betonline.ag, and you will receive a 100% welcome bonus. Be sure to take advantage of their opening day super promo, which means if you make a bet on Thursday, September 9th, for that season opener between the Bucs and Cowboys, and even if you lose, your wager will be refunded up to $25. BetOnline is the fastest and easiest way to bet on all your favorite sports, from football, basketball, boxing, right all the way to horse racing. Don't wait and take advantage of all the great offers available for the 2021 season. BetOnline, your online sportsbook experts.
Hey, new FanDuel fantasy players, your day is about to get 20% better. Start playing fantasy this football season, and FanDuel will give you 20% bonus on your first deposit, up to $500. That's a big-time bonus, and all you need to do to claim it is to make your first deposit on FanDuel. This is Vinny Iyer, host of Locked On Fantasy Football, and I've been playing on FanDuel for years. It's a lot of fun. I like to play tournaments. I like to play cash games. And most of all, I like to win, and you should get in on the action as well. If you haven't tried it, it's your chance to get in on FanDuel right now. You can also play private contests with your friends, and there's an awesome slate of games to open the 2021 season in Week 1. Excited to see what Trevor Lawrence can do. 6,800, great value there for the Jaguars rookie quarterback against the Texans. Another rookie you gotta love, Najee Harris, Steelers running back, 6,500. You can get him in your lineup against the Bills right away. Experience season-long wins without a season-long wait. Sign up today at FanDuel.com/LockedOn to claim your bonus and start playing today. That's FanDuel.com/LockedOn. Age and location restrictions apply. Bonus issued as non-withdrawable site credit that expires after 30 days.
So looking at some of the various roster battles on the offensive side of the ball, beyond the quarterback 2 conversation, currently I feel pretty good about my sort of initial roster projection, and certainly the updates I gave a week ago in some of these position battles. Looking at the wide receiver position, initially I thought the Falcons would keep 5. I think there's a chance that they might keep 6 at this point. I do think Christian Blake is currently working ahead of Frank Darby. Blake didn't do a ton to impress against Miami. The one catch he had was a kind of a push off against Byron Jones in order to get that separation, but it was a nice grab for him. And, what the other play that really stood out for me with Christian Blake was he had a big play wide open on a corner route on that when Franks first came into the game, and he got pressure up the middle and sort of extended outside the pocket and wound up throwing the ball away. Christian Blake was wide open on a corner route. It would have been easily a 25-yard gain if that pressure hadn't come up the middle, thanks to Sam Jones for giving it up, and that sort of flush Franks out the pocket to wind up throwing that ball away. So, I feel like Blake is on a path to making the roster, but by no means is guaranteed at this point in time. The other position battle that I think was intriguing from this Dolphins game is Jason Spriggs had a very promising game against the Dolphins and probably is going to be the week 1 swing tackle, assuming there isn't a big dip this upcoming week. Willie Beavers probably will still wind up making the roster because the Falcons the coaching staff does seem to like him. But to me, at least early in the game, particularly among the 5 starters that started this game against Miami, he was the weakest link of those guys. In terms of performance in this Dolphins game, I thought the deep backups like Ryan Newsel and Joe Sculthorpe really looked good in their single drive in the fourth quarter at the end of the game, where we saw those big runs from Javian Hawkins and Caleb Huntley, and they kind of had the key blocks on both of those 30-yard runs, those back-to-back 30-yard runs, including Huntley's touchdown. And so those are 2 guys that I think are well on their way to potentially practice squad spots. Speaking of Hawkins and Huntley, I feel like Caleb Huntley is beginning to create a little separation between him and the other running backs as far as the front runner if the Falcons wind up keeping a 4th running back on the team. And right now I'm not convinced that they will. I think Huntley has done good work, but I don't necessarily know if the Falcons are going to feel as compelled as we probably thought going into the summer that they definitely are going to keep a 4th running back beyond Mike Davis, Quadri Olison, and Cordero Patterson on the roster. But we'll sort of see how that goes. Certainly there'll be a guy on the practice squad, but I'm not as convinced, not as sold as I was going into the summer that they will keep a 4th guy. But, I thought Huntley showed a lot more potential as a pass protector than Hawkins does, given the size. I think Huntley has shown arguably a lot more juice than Hawkins, given that was sort of Hawkins' game, which is being this sort of super explosive running back. But Huntley, not only as a pass catcher, but also as a runner, has shown a little bit more vision, a little bit more juice as a running back. So I think this next game against Cleveland is going to be intriguing, but the battle between those guys, as well as Deontay Foreman, who I don't think is out of it. I think Foreman is a little bit more of that 3 yards in a cloud of dust type of running back. And I think Huntley and Hawkins have that edge in terms of bringing a little bit more juice at that running back position that kind of needs that type of player. But certainly I think next week could go a long way, particularly the second half of next week's game against Cleveland could go a long way to determining that fourth running back battle. The tight end battle is interesting. John Rain has been working at fullback as well as getting a lot more opportunities as a pass catcher. His blocking has been a little suspect, not only at fullback, but also when he's gotten opportunities as an inline blocking tight end. The Falcons did sign David Wells to replace Ryan Becker, who went on IR. We didn't really talk about it on the pod, but there's not a whole lot to discuss there. Wells was decent in his first action against Miami as a blocker, primarily used as a blocker. Parker Hess, that battle for the fourth tight end spot to fill the vacated spot left by Jaden Graham going on IR earlier this summer, it seems like it's going to be between Rain and Hess, but Hess has the blocking ability. Rain has the receiving ability. Maybe Rain has a little bit more versatility and upside as a special teams player. He's got a few more snaps there. So we'll see what that battle that could come down to the wire in this Browns game. And I think what's intriguing about it is that if you're looking at who's going to wind up making it, you look probably ahead to next offseason where both Hayden Hurst and Lee Smith are free agents, and both of those guys, the probability that both of those guys are back in Atlanta in 2022 seems very low at this point in time. But, Hess as a blocker seems like a more ready-made replacement for Lee Smith as that sort of third blocking tight end than necessarily Rain stepping into Hayden Hurst's shoes. So for me, at least, based off of that, I feel like Hess is probably a little bit more deserving just because there's a little bit more potential that he could carve out a role for the Falcons in 2022 than Rain can, but we'll sort of see how that goes. And let's talk about the ongoing competition for that starting left guard spot. Obviously, we didn't see Drew Dalman take a snap at left guard, so I think the chances of him sort of coming in, swooping in, and stealing that job are extremely low. I thought Dalman struggled in this Dolphins game playing that center position, going up against those physical D tackles that Miami has, those starting guys, John Jenkins, Raekwon Davis, very strong, big, powerful interior defensive linemen, and they really sort of put Dolman on skates several times in this game, and we knew that was a weakness of Dolman's coming into the league, and that got a bit exposed. The real battle at left guard is presumably between Josh Andrews and Jalen Mayfield. Josh Andrews did start this game, got only a single series of work before he got pulled in favor of Mayfield, who filled in the rest of the game until that final drive in the fourth quarter where Newsel came in at left guard, and then Mayfield moved out to right tackle for that single series. I thought Andrews played pretty well. He definitely had a bounce back performance from his performance the week ago against Tennessee. Of the four Falcons blockers that Pro Football Focus graded out as a 65 or above in this Dolphins game, it was Newsel, it was Spriggs, it was Sculthorpe, and Andrews. And those grades accurately reflect what I saw watching the film. And yes, I did get my hands on that Black Market All 22. But I thought Andrews did a really good job run blocking on that opening series. Everybody did on that opening series. We saw Caleb McGarry get his start and look pretty good as a run blocker. He had one bad rep as a pass protector, getting beat by Emmanuel Ogbah. But, everybody on that starting offensive line, at least as run blockers, where we're talking about McGarry, Drew Dalman, Sam Jones, Josh Andrews look good as a run blocker. Willie Beavers, not so much. With Mayfield, when he got into the game, I think there are still some issues in terms of his scheme fit, some athletic limitations in terms of making those reach blocks, climbing to the second level like you want as a guard in this outside zone run blocking scheme that Arthur Smith's employing. And we saw a number of those sort of classic stretch plays in this Dolphins game than we didn't necessarily see in the Titans game a week ago. And while I don't think Mayfield is like an awful fit in that regard in terms of his limitations or whatnot, but I do think if he was a full-time starter, we would see him as the weakest link, at least in theory, of our Falcons starting five, although, again, we don't really know what Matt Hennessy is going to be. And so I still have those misgivings about Mayfield being the starter, but at the same time, we kind of know what Josh Andrews is. And despite 6 good snaps as a run blocker this past weekend, I'm not going to sit here and delude myself that he's a better option or a good option at that left guard position, even if he may be technically a better scheme fit in terms of the run blocking stuff. And it's clear that the Falcons have a vested interest in finding out what they have in Jalen Mayfield, their 3rd round pick this year. So I still expect him to be the week 1 starter at left guard, but let's just say nothing I have seen so far this summer has made me feel like I need to rethink my initial post-draft evaluation of Jalen Mayfield, which regular listeners know was not particularly positive. So I'm hoping an extended look, possibly with the starters this week against Cleveland, we could see him perform better, and that will be a golden opportunity essentially for him to prove me wrong in that previous statement. So we'll continue. That's where we'll wrap up the offense, and we'll wrap up today's podcast looking at the defensive side of the ball, the standouts there or lack thereof against Miami, see how that affects the various roster projections, and we'll spend considerable time talking about the team's linebacker and cornerback depth. But before we get there, guys, I do want to plug the college football side of things. Of course, this past Saturday was the last Saturday without college football, and of course, if you have your favorite college football team or conference, you can find a daily podcast devoted to them here on the Locked On Podcast Network. Whether you're a Georgia fan at Locked On Bulldogs, a Bama fan at Locked On Bama, a Buckeyes fan at Locked On Buckeyes, or Locked On Pac-12, Locked On SEC, whoever, you can subscribe to those shows on the Odyssey app or wherever you get your podcasts. So guys, did you know that Built Bar, the best tasting protein bar in the market, has several delicious flavors? Whether you're a fan of coconut almond like me, or you prefer mint brownie, cookies and cream, cherry barcia, double chocolate, salted caramel, coconut, raspberry, orange, or strawberry, there's something for everyone. And there's also the occasional limited time flavor too, and you can try them all with your mixed box. And you'll want to, in order to get that healthy snack that tastes just like a candy bar with none of the guilt. Built Bars contain 100% real chocolate. They're soft and easy to chew. My favorite, the coconut almond, tastes just like an almond joy. But it's not just about Built Bars' great taste. They're healthy too. They're low in sugar, low in calories, high in protein, high in fiber. All you got to do to take advantage of this offer is head over to built.com, use the promo code LOCKED15, and you'll get 15% off your first order. That's promo code LOCKED15 for 15% off at built.com. This episode is also brought to you by Rock Auto. With ever-increasing numbers of makes and models, it's now impossible for your local chain auto parts store to stock all the parts you need. Why wait while the person behind the counter orders the parts on their computer when you have a computer with access to rockauto.com at home or in your pocket? Save time and money when using Rock Auto. You'll spend up to twice as much for the same parts when you order from a chain store or car dealership. Meanwhile, Rock Auto's prices are always reliably low for every customer. Rock Auto is a family business serving do-it-yourselfers for over 20 years. They have everything you need, from brake parts, tail lamps, motor oil, even new carpet. Go explore their easy-to-use website yourself today and find the solution to your auto parts needs. Go to rockauto.com right now. See all the parts available for your car or truck. Write Locked On in the How Did You Hear About Us box so that they know we sent you. Amazing selection, reliably low prices, all the parts your car will ever need. rockauto.com. So probably my biggest takeaway from the Dolphins game was, despite a very promising start from undrafted free agent linebackers Errol Thompson and Dorian Etheridge against Tennessee, I think their stock dipped considerably against Miami. You know, Thompson showed some real athletic limitations early in the game in coverage when matched up against Myles Gaskin. And granted, it's not an easy assignment given that Gaskin was arguably one of the 5 to 10 best receiving running backs in the NFL last year. But basically, unless Thompson is moving in a straight line downhill and taking on an offensive lineman, anytime you're asking him to move laterally sideline to sideline, his athletic limitations showed, and Gaskin really put that on full display on a number of plays. One thing I tweeted out on Sunday was the possibility that the Falcons might decide to stash him on the practice squad and try to convert him into a fullback where those athletic limitations will be less of an issue. This was a similar situation that Keith Smith ran into early in his career, who was a college inside linebacker at San Jose State. The linebacker, as an undrafted free agent with the Cowboys in 2014, was able to stick on the practice squad for a couple of seasons before the Cowboys realized that his chances of sticking long term would be much better if he made the switch to fullback, and that began in 2016. And frankly, you know, I would bet that Keith Smith probably would have washed out of the NFL within a year or two of that point had he not made that switch. And I think Thompson's in a similar boat. I think he has the physicality to make that transition in terms of going head up with a 300-pound offensive lineman. There is absolutely no fear in Errol Thompson. And that's the type of mentality I want in a fullback that's trying to clear a lane for the running back. As for Dorian Etheridge, the thing I noted last week was, despite him making several plays, several tackles for losses, and being solid against the run against the Titans, in terms of his instincts, awareness, and coverage abilities, there was a lot left to be desired, which is why his Pro Football Focus grade last week against Tennessee was not particularly high, despite having very high production in certain metrics. I think he was a little better in sort of the awareness category this week, but without sort of the positive plays that he had against the run, those tackles for loss, there wasn't a lot to love from his film this week. And, you know, the thing that's notable about Etheridge is he's gotten a lot of work on special teams coverage units these past 2 games. Thompson has yet to get any snaps on the coverage units. And, you would imagine if a guy was going to stick as that 4th inside linebacker after Deion Jones-Foye, Oluokun, and Michael Walker, that guy's going to primarily be asked to play special teams. So I think that gives Etheridge the leg up in terms of Thompson, despite Thompson basically being the team's starting middle linebacker opposite Michael Walker in these preseason games. But I think right now I would not think that either player is a strong bet unless they can get significantly better play this upcoming week against Cleveland. I don't think either player is a great bet to make the roster because of their coverage limitations, because they tend to be a little one note against the run. I feel like the Falcons can probably get away with moving Brandon Copeland back to that inside linebacker position in large part due to the emergence of someone like an Ade Ogundeji, which, gives them 4 competent edges behind Dante Fowler, Stephen Means, Jacob Tuioti-Mariner with Ogundeji there. And Copeland has exclusively worked as an outside linebacker so far this preseason, but he has NFL experience as an inside linebacker. So I think the Falcons are good there in terms of keeping 4 inside linebackers and 4 outside linebackers. Moving on to the defensive backs, I'm kind of waffling on how many DBs I think the Falcons are going to keep, and I think this Browns game could wind up determining it. Kendall Sheffield has been injured and missed a lot of time, and it seems like it's kind of out of sight, out of mind, and that could wind up costing him a roster spot. I haven't been that impressed with Chris Williamson's coverage ability in the games thus far. He did manage to start, though, opposite Fabian Moreau, so it's clear that the coaching staff likes something about his game. And, Williamson was a player that going into the summer, I mentioned as a potential sleeper to make the roster. At that time, I thought it would be possibly making it over a player like Isaiah Oliver, but it seems like Oliver at this point in time is probably a lock to make the team. I thought he could be a surprise cut going into the summer, but there doesn't seem to be a viable challenger for him for that nickel cornerback spot. We've seen Richie Grant, Avery Williams, and Darren Hall get some reps in the slot this preseason, but none of them have really impressed a ton to really think that they're really challenging Oliver, who did start the game and then play the opening series as the team's nickel cornerback. I do think Richie Grant's coverage was probably better this week against Miami than it was a week ago against Tennessee, but to me, he's not breathing down Oliver's neck for that nickel cornerback job. And, people know, longtime listeners know I'm not an Isaiah Oliver hater. I've been critical of his play over the years. But, at least last year I was probably on an island in terms of early last season in terms of defending him. But I'm kind of over the Isaiah Oliver experience at this point in time. And, I don't buy into the narrative that I've seen other people put out there that like somehow Dean Pease's scheme is going to fix him. We know that the main issue of why Isaiah Oliver has not been successful in this league is that he struggles matching up against speed and quickness. And that's one of the reasons why he has been more effective as an inside corner than he was as an outside corner, because you are often facing guys that can run 4.3s or 4.4s as an outside corner. And you can kind of get away with it a little better against some of the slot receivers nowadays. But Isaiah Oliver struggles against speed and quickness is not going to change. And unless his technique has improved like 500% this past offseason, that weakness is not going to go anywhere. No scheme is going to be able to hide that weakness. Just because you can't stay in phase, you can't stay in phase. No scheme is going to fix that. And so there's going to be a lot of matchups this upcoming season where Oliver's going to be going up against those quick, fast wide receivers, the Jalen Waddles, the Cole Beasleys, the Devontae Smiths, the CeeDee Lambs, etc. in the slot. And while I think Dean Pease's scheme could certainly make him a more productive and impactful blitzer, getting a few more sacks and pressures is not going to make up for, all those games where, opposing offenses are prone to be picking on him and going after him in ways that they may have not gone after him last year. So that's why I was so gung-ho going into the summer on like Darren Hall winning that nickel cornerback spot, but it doesn't seem like that's going to happen. I think Hall has been decent in limited opportunities. I watched him. He did give up a big play against Miami after missing a tackle after the catch. But he's clearly not in a position to really challenge for that starting nickel cornerback spot. And, guys like Chris Williamson, TJ Green, and Delrick Abrams are getting more playing time than Hall is at cornerback, which is not a great sign. I don't, no need to panic in that regard. But, three of those guys I just named in Williamson, Green, and Abrams, you can argue would probably be better safeties than cornerbacks, which, gives me a lot of pause with the Falcons cornerback depth right now. So overall, I have questions right now if the Falcons are going to keep 5 or 6 corners. I think Williamson probably would be the 6th guy. I wonder if they're going to keep 4 or 5 safeties, with TJ Green possibly being the 5th guy as far as safeties are concerned. But we haven't seen Green get a single snap at safety so far this preseason. And because of that, I'm not quite sure where he fits in. Do the Falcons see him as a corner? Do they see him as a safety? Is his playing time at cornerback been because the Falcons haven't been playing their starters? I don't know what's going on with that. So I think Green was probably better this week against Miami, playing that cornerback position than he was a week ago against Tennessee. But, I still have a hard time understanding or buying that the Falcons, are in love with TJ Green as a cornerback and they see that as his permanent position, rather than just sort of a short-term stopgap option, given that he has dabbled at that position dating from his days in Indianapolis. I thought Fabian Moreau did do some good work in very limited action in that opening series. And, I just kind of look at the Falcons cornerback room based off of what I've seen so far this preseason. It's like, it's AJ Terrell, it's Fabian Moreau, and then it's Wolf. It's just like, I'm not in love with corners 3 through 6 that the Falcons are going to have this year. So, Lord knows, let's hope AJ Terrell and Fabian Moreau play lights out, and hopefully, just everybody else just hang on for dear life. So I think the good thing that the Falcons have in their favor this year as compared to last year is that last year, if you go look at the top 20 fantasy wide receiver rankings in terms of their final stats, 13 of those guys were on the Falcons schedule last year. And so it was just kind of a murderer's row of some of the top wide receivers in the league. And, they exposed some major issues in that secondary. And at least based off of last year's finishes, only 10 of the top 20 fantasy wide receivers are on their schedule this year. But I think, obviously it depends on sort of whose rankings and whose projections you're looking at. But it's probably more likely that we will only see 7 or 8 this year, just because I'm not as optimistic that players like Marvin Jones and Nelson Aguilar are going to be as productive this year as they were a year ago and finish in the top 20 among fantasy receivers. So, the Falcons might get a little bit of a break, that their secondary, their cornerback issues may not be as exposed this year as they were a year ago, but we'll just sort of have to see. So, those are basically my main takeaways from this Dolphins game, and we'll see what develops over the next week. We'll see how the Falcons wind up addressing their quarterback situation, that vacancy there to fill the shoes of A.J. McCarron, if they choose to do so at all this week, or they wait a week till those final cuts, or maybe they bring in a body to get them through this week and have an emergency quarterback 3 that can possibly play, against the Browns in the event that they have another injury at the quarterback position and they're not forced to play guys like Russell Gage and Olamide Zaccheaus as their emergency quarterback or whatever the case may be, and then wind up, when the final cuts are made and they see a better option out there, wind up going after that guy. So we'll see how that goes. Of course, we got another great week of Locked On Falcons podcast here for you guys. We have some guests coming this week, as well as some segments from the various hosts of the Locked On shows covering some of the NFC East teams that I talked with, several weeks ago as a training camp preview to get you guys geared up on some of those teams that we're going to be facing early in the season. And we'll get some of that stuff later this week, as well as other content. And of course, if and when the Falcons do make a move at the quarterback position, we'll cover it as well. And if you have any feedback that you want to provide me on anything I talked about on today's episode, anything I talked about in previous episodes, or anything you want me to talk about in future episodes, of course, you can hit me up on Twitter at Locked On Falcons, on Facebook at Locked On Falcons, or you can send an email to lockedonfalcons@mail.com. And before you send me another angry email, I've gotten a couple from people saying stop complaining about not playing the starters. I've gotten hit up on Twitter from some of you that stop complaining about it. As a peace offering, maybe I could make a little bit of money for you guys, or it's not really me that's making the money for you. It's handicapping expert Lee Sterling, who joins your boy Q on a daily basis on the Locked On Bets podcast. Go check out the Locked On Bets podcast before you send that angry email, before you hit me with that angry tweet. Go get Lee's Lock of the Day, get Lee's Daily Picks to help make you some money, and subscribe to the Locked On Bets podcast, brought to you by betonline.ag on the Odyssey app or wherever you get your podcasts. All right, guys, appreciate it. Till then.
The two top teams in baseball battle it out for 10 in a row. Here's what our local experts are locked on today. The New York Yankees won their 10th straight game, knocking off the red-hot Atlanta Braves 5-1 on Monday. The Yankees are still second to the Rays in the AL East, but for how long? Subscribe to Locked On Yankees on YouTube today to get Stacey Gotsulias' take on one of the most competitive division races in the MLB. New England Patriots quarterback Cam Newton will miss at least 3 days of practice after traveling to a team-approved, out-of-town medical appointment due to what the team is calling a, quote, misunderstanding about tests conducted away from NFL facilities. Could this open the door for rookie quarterback Mac Jones to get the starting job on Week 1? Listen to the Locked On Patriots podcast today to find out. On Locked On NHL, they are ranking the top 50 players heading into the NHL's 2021-2022 season. Subscribe to Locked On NHL on YouTube to watch or wherever you get podcasts to listen. Local experts on the biggest stories, it's the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.